Well, good morning, everybody. It is good to see you today. I know we have a handful of people back from vacation, back from illnesses. We have visitors. Regardless of any of it, we are just glad to be here today, and I'm glad to see your smiling faces. And I hope that you come to know the love of God a little bit better by being here today. Well, the kids are back to their children's service, so no fancy props or songs for me this week. If you weren't here last week, we had a kids-oriented sermon with some stuff. Although I did have plenty of adults tell me they want props and stuff in their lessons too. Okay, so maybe we'll start doing that. You'll get a bunch of fun things. I'll get to return to my youth ministry days. But I really do want to just stop and thank you all for all the encouragement you shared about that everyone came to me and just described how spiritually uplifted they were by being involved in this kids' service. Sometimes doing something new like that makes you nervous that people aren't going to get anything out of it or it won't be as beneficial. But the collective cry I heard last week was just how much of a blessing it is to see our young people be spiritually cared for and have that extra intentionality for them, because the kids are such an important part of who we are as the body of Christ. Not just for the future, which is obviously important, but also for now. And so it's so important for us to take that time to invest in them and to love on them and to make sure that they know God in a way that really speaks to them. Not to mention the fact that, we have a ton to learn from our kids, right? We have a ton to learn from our kids. And we are going to be blessed, not just uplifted, oh, look how nice this is, but also because we hear their answers. And we hear what they have to say, and we learn how to be better people when we listen to our kids. And so giving them that center stage from time to time is so important. I will say, one of the things specifically that I really love about kids, would like to learn from kids is, man, how easily they make friends, right? Some of you parents, you've seen this. It is so easy for kids to make friends. I don't know how they do it, because it happens so fast, I blink and I miss the process that goes on between friends, right? You drop off kids at the playground, and next thing they know, how they have friends. I don't actually know how it happens. It's just there. They bump into each other, and they make friends. But that's not exactly the same case with adults, is it? If I dropped you guys off at a playground, you might not automatically be friends. Okay, I don't know what the adult playgrounds are, Kroger's maybe, but you don't get to the checkout line with new friends, do you? And there's tons of adults there. We have to have this real big elaborate process where, some common thread has brought us to the same place at the same time, and we sit there as quiet and awkwardly as we can until we just have to say something. Then it's usually small talk, something about the weather or something going on, and if that goes well, maybe I'll prod a little deeper, see if we have any similar interests. If you like the same sports teams that I do, or if you like the same cooking recipes or whatever, I guess I don't relate on cooking recipes, but we dive to that deeper level, and then maybe, if things are going really well, I'll see where you stand on some controversial stuff, see if we have similar values, something like that, and then maybe we can hang out more in the future. It's this whole psychological test that we put people to before we can really build a relationship. But at the same time, we recognize that that's not necessarily bad. That's really what we do with all of our relationships, right? Our new relationships as well as our old relationships, the good ones as well as the bad ones. Someone initiates a conversation, someone initiates an action with us, engages us, and then we respond, and they respond, and we respond, and they respond, and it's a cycle, right? It takes a little bit of giving and taking to really have a genuine relationship with someone, whether you're meeting them for the first time and establishing that relationship, or it's one you've had for a long time, because if I quit engaging you, if I quit talking to you, if I quit trying to make contact, and you do as well, there won't be a relationship anymore, right? It takes an involvement and it takes response over and over again. If I stretch out my hand to you, you shake it. If I say hello, you say good morning. As a man, if I'm walking down the sidewalk and another man is walking my way, I give him the head nod and awkwardly walk by, and he does the same, okay? That's how we relate to each other. In psychology, they literally have a pattern for this. They describe it as the initiative and response pattern that builds relationships, that makes them strong, that makes there actually a quality and a common thread between people. And what's interesting to me about this, from our kids to adults or whatever, is really that it's really no different with God. I don't know if you think about it that way, that it's really no different with God. Our relationship with God pretty much follows that same pattern. Now, I know it might be weird to think about a relationship with God being the same way we might relate to our friends or our families or even with strangers. And yes, because it is God, there are plenty of differences that are going to come engaging and having a relationship with the divine God. But at the basic level, it's still a response to God's initiatives and his response to our response, right? It's a give and take, and that's how we grow our relationship with God. Now, obviously, God's initiatives in our lives are going to be significantly different than the ones we read about in the Bible, especially the Old Testament. Very seldomly are you on your way to that Kroger and you're hit with a bright light and an audible voice telling you to do something, right? My daughter, we're learning about Moses on Sunday nights now. My daughter the other day asked me if I had ever seen a burning bush, okay, if God had ever talked to me through a burning bush, and he hasn't, just in case, right? And we don't get those kind of experiences much anymore. But that doesn't mean that God isn't involved in our world, that he isn't involved in our lives, right? Not at all. At least not according to Christianity. The Bible has taught us about a God who draws near to us, a God who has put his Spirit to live within us and to guide us, and a God who plays an active role in this story that is being played out from day one till the last day and the day that you and I are living today. God is active and alive in our lives and in this world. But you might ask, okay, well, if he's not doing the things we read about in the Old Testament, how then is he engaging us today? How are we supposed to have a relationship? Right? If he's not burning bushes, if he's not blinding us with light, how are we going to have that contact, to have that give and take and have a relationship? Well, it still starts with what we've been saying, God's initiatives. It still starts with his initiatives in our lives. And it's always God taking that first step, okay? Do we understand that? It's always God starting that relationship. We will never be the ones to stretch out our hand first in a relationship with God. We will never be the ones to try to kick-start that relationship. As the pre-existing creator, he has instigated the relationship with us by creating us, by the fact that he has poured love out for us before we were even existing. He has always and will always take that first step towards us. As the Almighty God, as the one who existed forever before us, we can't ever be like, hey, God, I want to have a relationship with you. And he says, okay, let's do that. He's already asking us to be in a relationship with him from the very beginning. He continually puts effort out there for us to see him and do it closer. Because it's not just the beginning. He's in our lives now. He's putting out these things to draw us closer to him so that we can see him more, so that we can love him more. There's so many examples we could give, right? Sending Jesus was a divine initiative for God so that you, as an individual 2,000 years later, can have a relationship with God. Because we see Jesus in the Bible. We read about Jesus, and through Jesus, we know God better. We see what God is like while he walked on this earth. When Jesus went and died on the cross, that was a divine initiative so that we could receive forgiveness of our sins, so that we could spend eternity with him unhindered and know him perfectly. Inspiring the words of the Bible was a divine initiative so we could understand him more and hear his commands and live the good life he wants us to live. Those are some of the big ones. Those are some of the ones that apply for forever and always. But there are personal initiatives as well. For example, sometimes God puts good friends in our lives to lead us to a healthier and more faithful life, to lead us to knowing him better. You have one of those friends? Do you ever have one of those mentors that God instigated in your life so that you could be a better Christian, so you can know God more? We talk about God incidences all the time here at church. If you've been around at all, you've heard us use that word. When the song service and the communion comments and the sermon and the opening all come together for the same message, for the edification of this gathering, this family that we did not organize, we like to think that God had a hand in that he did that to bless us, to equip us and to edify us. Or, I really think a divine initiative was, for me personally in my own life, running into Mark Staten at Winterfest in 2014, okay? I see that as the hand of God because it's led to this 8-year ministry where I've been able to be blessed by all of you and try to serve you over these years. You know, it might not be a loud, booming voice, might not be a bright light or a burning bush, but God's hands are still involved in our lives today. They are. And we don't even try to deny that, do we? We talk about it. You know, it's everywhere. But when we think about this, I think it's important for us to recognize it, right? You know, what kind of a relationship would it be if we never noticed what God was doing for us? Think about that. What kind of a relationship would it be if we never noticed what God was doing for us? Just put it on a personal level. If I was constantly trying to engage you, trying to contact you and talk to you, if I was doing things to bless your life, but then you just constantly ignored me, didn't respond to me, just credited all the nice things I did to you to good luck or something like that, how good is our relationship going to be? It's not. That's not even a relationship, right? If it's all one-sided. It's important for us to notice what God is doing in our lives. Now, like I said, we don't tend to talk about this too much in the church because we're afraid that it becomes a slippery slope, and I understand that, right? It can turn into this subjective thing where, hey, God wants me to buy a boat because there's this divine initiative of this boat coupon in my mailbox that's clearly the hand of God to make me to buy a boat, okay? Because that is a divine initiative, and my human response will be to follow in His will and buy my boat, right? It can turn into that kind of thing. And so it's so important to be careful about this. The question then is, what do we do? If we believe God is active in our lives, active in this world, but sometimes that can be so clearly abused, what do we do? What do we do? Well, I think first off, and I like to say this, and maybe you've heard me say it before, we hold it lightly. When we perceive something to be God's work in our lives, and we understand it to be God at work, we hold that lightly. I am not going to say that what I believe was God's hand in me coming here is authoritative or as divinely inspired as these words, right? It's nothing like that. I believe that. I thank God for that. But if it just happened to be the doings of the world, I'm okay with that, right? I can hold that lightly. But while we hold it lightly, we also do two other things to help figure it out. We consult this, okay? God gave us this to show us who He is, what He loves, what He wants for us to do. And if it is incompatible with this, it's not of God. We can figure that out right away. And secondly, I bring it to you, the church, the body of people who know God, who have read His Word, who love Him and who have served Him and who have listened to Him your whole lives. And when I'm with you and if I have a decision to make and I'm trying to decide if this is God's action in my life or not, I consult other Christians who know God well. And I think through our collective efforts of understanding God, we can better see and know God's actions in our world, right? Does that make sense? That's how we discern. That's always a question I get as the preacher. How do I discern if something is the will of God? How do I discern if this is God in my life or not? Two things are my big, there's a whole sermon on it, okay, that you haven't had. Maybe we'll do it one day. But the Bible and the community of faith are the two biggest things. So, if God is doing things in, with, and through us, that doesn't make a relationship, does it? If God is doing things in, with, and through us, that only makes half of a relationship. You know, like we see in our own relationships, it takes two to make a genuine connection. There has to be a divine initiative, which God is already at work doing, and then there has to be a human's response. Now, that human response can be resistance. Can't it? That's still a response, isn't it? To resist and to deny. Ignoring God, rejecting God, it's still a response. Obviously, it's one that shuts down growth for the relationship, shuts down the quality of the relationship there. But it happens all the time. People decide, I don't want to have a relationship with God. I don't want these things He's done to touch me, that He's done in my life. I'm going to reject it. But whether it's denying Jesus outright, rejecting His blessings, refusing to turn to Him in hard times, whatever it may be, a lot of times people just flat out see God extending that hand, to put it in a metaphor, and turn the other way and completely reject it. And that's seldom just out of pure evilness, right? We have things in our background that cause us to do that. Maybe we don't want God to be close to us because we're afraid that God won't like what He sees once He gets to know us. Not that that's ever hidden from God, right? Maybe we've been hurt by others who got close to us and then abandoned us, and we're afraid that God will do the same, which he never would. Or maybe we know that growing closer to God will mean we have to give up certain things in our life that we don't want to give up. So we choose those things over God. Whatever it may be, we resist efforts from God to build a relationship with us. And to be honest, I hate seeing that. I don't use hate very often. I hate seeing that because people miss out on the beauty that is a life with God. They miss out on understanding that deeper love that God has for us. They miss out on what true and full and abundant life looks like because they resist the Creator. But God is stretching out the hand, and we're going to respond one way or another. The reverse of resisting is to welcome those responses, those initiatives that God's placed in our life. A response of welcome can look like obedience, it can look like faith, openness, thankfulness, all sorts of things. But a positive response from God's work in our lives will ultimately produce that full and abundant life that he so desperately wants for us. The stuff that God promises us in the Bible. And we welcome that life. We welcome God in our life every time we read the Bible, every time we respond in prayer, every time we follow Christ by caring for somebody in need. Those are all faithful responses to things God is pointing in towards us. God is drawing near to us. God has done things. So sometimes having that person in need on the corner when you're driving to work might be an initiative from God. And that's why we try to put together these homeless care packages and do things as a church so we can be prepared with a faithful response. To see God's invitation to care for somebody, which is the heart of God, that helps us know the heart of God, and to do something faithful and obedient. Now, of course, our lives are seldom as black and white as always accepting his invitations or always rejecting and refusing his invitations. It's never going to be that cut and dry, right? Sometimes, hopefully, we're living a more faithful life and we're doing it. But even the most faithful of us will sometimes see an invitation from God and decide not to do it. I think we can probably think of something like that in the last week, right? When we kind of felt like there was something maybe we should do, something that was the right decision to do, but we just kind of put it out of the back of our mind because it doesn't fit with my schedule. Or I don't want to do that, right? And so we end up rejecting some of the invitations by God. It's just part of the human life. And then on the other hand, there are people who really lean into worldly ways and then things of this world who find themselves trusting in God and accepting his invitations from time to time. It's never going to be black and white, but the goal for us is to live towards God's invitations as much as we can. Constantly holding our hands open for God to lead us, right? Holding our hands open for God to use us and lead us in whatever ways he will so that we can be his faithful image bearers. And so we respond, right? But then when we respond, God responds to our response. Don't worry, we're not just going to keep going down this. Okay, this last one. When we respond, God responds to our response. It's that continual back and forth in a relationship. First, God acts, he by giving us the Bible, by sending us Jesus, by leading us to a church family, whatever. He acts, and then we respond. We get baptized, we study Scripture, we overcome our sinful addictions. And then God responds to whatever decisions we've made. It's a relationship. If we obey, he blesses us. Now, not always with material things, right? We got to be careful that we get that prosperity gospel going. Just obedience does not always lead to material wealth or physical health or any of that, okay? But we are blessed. By obeying God and being faithful to God, we are blessed. It might just be internally, being able to better see the love and joy of God in this world. It might be the reward of heaven later one day. It is blessed. Sometimes we choose to disobey, and how does God respond to our disobedience? I'm curious what your answer to this is. Think about it. How does God respond to our disobedience? With mercy. That's the answer. With grace. With mercy. But sometimes we respond in continually choosing greater evils and greater evils and greater evils, and eventually the response to that is judgment, or I like the word better, justice. It's the same word. Justice, where we are the people in the wrong. But even in those new actions that he provides for us, it's going to call us to respond again, and then he will respond again. And it's this cycle where God strives to grow closer towards us, either by us also growing closer towards us, by us diving in to him, or by us rejecting him until that final day where God gives us what we want, where he gives us the desire of our heart. And it's an interesting way to think about this, that the judgment day is where we finally reach the fulfillment of how we've lived in this initiative and response relationship. Judgment Day will be the day where God invites us in and we will dive right in, unhindered, unencumbered, and we will know him fully, we will love him fully, and we will be with him for eternity. Or we'll be able to reject that invitation one last time where God will never bother us again, right? And I think this whole idea of initiatives and response, Jesus summarizes it so well in some words at the very end of the Bible. In Revelation, talking to the church, Jesus says, "Here I am. I stand at the door and knock." That's the initiative, right? I stand at the door, your door, and I knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, your response, I will come in and eat with that person and they with me. God's response to our response, right? God's initiatives are there knocking, and we have the decision to drown out the knocks or to open the door along the way. And he does it so that we can know him better. And, the reason that this whole sermon came to me after our studies of Exodus. We've been working on Exodus for Sunday nights now for 4 weeks, going to do it through the end of September. And every chapter, there's something new. God calls with the burning bush this man to be a prophet. And how does he respond? With questions, with hesitation. And how does God respond? With more information and more faithfulness and more empowering and more equipping. Or he calls Israel and he saves them. God acts to save them. They didn't do that. He saves them through the waters to be freed from their slavery. And how do they respond? With rejoicing and singing. He also calls them to a mountain where he displays himself to them, reveals himself in the clouds and the lightning and the thunder, and he speaks to them. How do they respond to that one? By making an idol and worshiping it instead, right? And then God responds, right? It's through the Bible, it's through our lives, it's everywhere. And this may not be the most inspiring sermon you hear all year. Really, I hope it isn't, okay? I hope this is not the most inspiring sermon you hear all year. I know it's a bit technical, I know it's a bit obvious, but it is incredibly important for living a faithful life. It's incredibly important for living a faithful life. It's about what it looks like to have a true relationship with God. It's obvious, it's technical, but it's about how to have a true relationship with God. We talk so often about our relationships with God and having a relationship with God, but sometimes I wonder if people really understand what that means. I wonder if people understand what it means to have a relationship with God. Because too often, even, we reduce it down to simply going to church, reading our Bibles, praying, and stuff like that. And yes, that is a huge part of having a good relationship with God. I'd be very surprised if you had a good relationship with God and weren't doing those things. That is vital, especially while God reigns in heaven before he comes again. That is a part of a good relationship. But I'll tell you right now, you can do every single one of those things and not have a relationship with God at all. Can't you? You can do every single one of those things and not have a relationship with God at all. We must have eyes to see that these things, from the Bible to the little things he's doing in your everyday life, are invitations from God to know him and to love him better, deeper than the day before. He's not some distant God snoozing away until Judgment Day. He wants to know you now. He wants to know you today. He wants to love you today. He wants you to know and love him more today, like a father, right? He wants that relationship to grow every day of your life, to have this genuine love and relationship beyond the repetitive acts of a religion. God doesn't want you to just have this religiosity towards him. He wants you to have a relationship with him. And he's already reaching out to make that happen. He has been since the beginning of time. That initiative is there for you. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Will you accept the invitation? Will you open the door while he's knocking? Or will you push him away? Either way, truly, either way, I hope you know that God won't be done with you while you live on this earth. You cannot turn him away from the door enough times in this life that he won't come back knocking the very next day. He will chase you down and fight for you no matter what. Because his love, God's love, won't accept anything else. It's kind of a little bit of an application to walk away with today. Many times we've encouraged you, hey, count your blessings. Around Thanksgiving time, it's always list the things you're thankful for, or look for someone in need and have an opportunity to serve someone, right? We do these kind of things a lot. But here's a new practice I'd like to encourage you to try to do on a daily or weekly basis just to help build your awareness of God's activity in your life. Ask yourself, where have God's initiatives been today? Or where have God's initiatives been this week? And then how have I responded, or how will I respond to those things God is doing? It trains us to look out and see and look for God in this world. And it helps us be faithful, more faithful the next time He is inviting us into something. Just on a personal level, I spent a few months at the beginning of this year, or the earlier parts of this year, doing this every day for a couple months, asking those questions about the day before every morning. And sometimes I was able to recognize some pretty incredible God incidences, like things that were just very amazing, that were more obvious to other people, not just myself, and I could really sing the praises of that. Other times it was pretty subtle. There were days where I didn't write anything down. There were days where it took me 20 minutes of sitting and thinking about it before I think I noticed what God was doing in my day that day. Sometimes it was as small as my kids. That God was teaching me about His love for me as I viewed my love for my kids after a really good day, right? That was an initiative from God in my life to know Him better. And then think on how we respond to those things. And I really encourage you to try that. Just today, tomorrow, for weeks, for the rest of your life, whatever it needs to be. It's a tool to see God and understand how we respond to God in our relationship with Him today. And maybe you're here today because He's extended an invitation to you. Maybe you're sitting, in fact, I know that you being here in these pews this morning is a positive response to God's initiative. Whether He worked through a friend inviting you, whether He worked for your parents raising you in this church generations ago, you are here this morning as a faithful response, and I appreciate that, and I hope you see that itself deepens your relationship with God. But maybe you're at the point this morning where you haven't had that relationship. Maybe you're ready to respond to God's invitation today to become a child of His through baptism. If that is you, we invite you to come and take advantage of that this morning as we stand and as we sing.